Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. July 24th, 2025, the Is John Roberts to Blame for Everything edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast. John, Emily, and I, we've been chit-chatting. It's practically like noon already because we've just been sitting here chit-chatting. But you know what that means? That means we're lubed, we're oiled up, we're ready to go. All the joints are moving. That was John Dickerson chuckling. He heard me say the word lube, didn't like it. Co-anchor of the CBS Evening News.
You're setting expectations in the opposite direction where they need to be. You need to set them in the basement.
Well, in the basement in my house is just the Peloton. That is Emily Bazelon, who is silently observing in horror of the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School. Hello, Emily.
No horror here. Silently observing without horror.
This week on the Gabfest,
which is her new motto,
we will explain how Trump's lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, the Epstein scandal, Democratic efforts to revive themselves, Trump's effort to depict Barack Obama as a traitor all fit together. Then, is John Roberts responsible for the superpowered Trump presidency and the authoritarian dictatorship we seem to be careening towards? Then, the fascinating and quite astonishingly brazen effort by Texas Republicans to do a mid-decade redistricting to win 4 to 6 more House seats for Republicans. Plus, we will have cocktail chatter.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you. Visit Blinds.com now for up to 50% off with minimum purchase plus a professional measure at no cost. Rules and restrictions apply.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel? Or that white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
So the Epstein situation, I don't know what else to call it, took a series of weird jags this week. Lots of jags. Everything was going on. The House Speaker shut down the House for 6 weeks to prevent Democrats and disgruntled Republicans from forcing some votes about releasing Epstein files, although a House committee still did a vote about that. A judge rejected the DOJ's request to unseal some of the Epstein papers. The DOJ is also getting involved with Ghislaine Maxwell. Most notably, the Wall Street Journal reported on a birthday album created for Epstein, seemingly at Ghislaine Maxwell's behest, that included what the Journal described as a lewd drawing and a sort of message that appeared to come from Donald Trump. This was created in 2003. Trump has now sued the Journal for $10 billion. He also then barred Journal reporters from the press pool on his trip to Scotland. Also, there is a whole separate thing going on with Barack Obama that somehow I think is connected to all of this, or at least is shadowboxing connected to it. So, John, does this Journal lawsuit help Trump by switching the focus of the Epstein story from him withholding information to all the meanie reporters being really mean to poor Donald Trump? Also, I forgot the whole thing that happened yesterday. Pam Bondi, it turns out the Journal also reported. I forgot as I was reading my own notes, like Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, also apparently warned or alerted the president in April that his name appeared in the Epstein files. You know what, John? That's just it. There's no question. Discuss.
Yeah, sure. Let's see if we can paw through all of this muck and put it into some categories. I mean, I think certainly one thing you noticed from the Wall Street Journal is they were not cowed by the lawsuit threat. And we should note as we come on the air, to use a cliche I truly hate, that Columbia University just reached a deal with the president for $200 million. And so it's in the larger context of the president being extremely successful, including with his ability to get at least $16 million out of Paramount, the parent company for CBS. He's been extremely successful in threatening lawsuits. And so I don't want to diminish what has been pretty much a historic use of the power of the law and the presidency to get people to do what he wants. However, the Wall Street Journal responded by just continuing to do reporting and reported what actually Elon Musk was the first to report on Twitter, which was that Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. So will this change the focus? It doesn't appear to have. And what seems to be one thing that we can say is different about this from all the other Trump scandals, and I'm still skeptical about this, but I've been skeptical all along, and befuddles me a little bit. But the energy is coming from within the House, which is to say the energy is coming from within the Republican base in a way that all the other previous Trump scandals didn't. In fact, you could argue one of the truths of those previous scandals is that his supporters let him off the hook for all these things that Republicans used to care a great deal about. But in this case, just to give you one quick example, and then I'll shut up, is in the House Rules Committee, Speaker Johnson, and you got to get things through the Rules Committee before they can kind of go through the rest of the process in the House. There was essentially a revolt from the Republican chair of the committee and others on it that they wouldn't go forward with any legislation unless they settled the Epstein business and found a way forward for how to deal with it. And that was in part because of pressure that Republicans are getting from their own base to release more material. And that, to me, is just that this would be the thing that would be so powerful. It continues to surprise me. But because it is, that means these attempts at diversions, and Obama's a part of that too, don't appear to have changed the focus for those members of the Republican base who care enough about this to be forcing this kind of action from their representatives.
Emily, why do you think Trump is so needled by this particular bit of work by the Journal around this drawing and around the idea that Bondi? I guess the thing that keeps surprising me is that we all knew that Epstein and Trump were connected, and they both are men who had a predilection they like, women, or in Epstein's case, likes girls in a deeply disturbing criminal way. But they both were they were famous for their aggressive qualities towards women, and of course they're New York guys who are connected. Why is it shocking that this would be coming out?
You sort of answered your own question, right? There are all these pictures of them together. Of course, Trump is in the Epstein files. He's in the flight logs. Now, let's also hasten to say that saying that your name is mentioned in these files, many people's names are mentioned, and it doesn't mean that you committed a criminal offense, right? I mean, that's part of the problem with this totally absolute and kind of all over the place demand for information is usually prosecutors are careful about what they release and don't release in the context of indicting people because you besmirch lots of other people's reputations. Now, I think also the fact that Trump and Epstein were at some point close, given the horrendous crimes that Epstein committed and the idea that there are dozens of girls who got caught up in this and Ghislaine Maxwell was procuring them for him, it got super ugly and awful. And so there's this playing this line that got crossed here where suddenly what seemed maybe in the moment in the early 2000s, oh yeah, these guys are both aggressive toward women and Epstein, that includes underage girls. Then the question becomes, well, what did Trump know about that at the time? What was he doing himself? All these questions about how is he mentioned in the files, which could bleed into terrible misconduct. And his followers care a lot about that misconduct and see this as, the kind of ultimate conspiracy that shows elite control of the world. So I think that's what the undercurrent is here. The other part of this, and John, and you both touched on this, I mean, the idea that then Pam Bondi under fire or directed by Trump turns to, a strike force about investigating the Obama administration and Obama himself and some idea of a years-long coup having to do with, the idea that Russia influenced the 2016 election in favor of Trump. That we're really verging into some serious revenge territory here in a very alarming way. And, I feel like we kind of predicted this, right? That the way to try to distract the MAGA base would be to offer them this other red meat. But that red meat is the idea of, locking up a former president based on, at the moment, just zero evidence of these things that Bondi is presumably buying into and that Tulsi Gabbard has been spewing all over the place.
Just to make the boring point about governance, Tulsi Gabbard, who's the director of national intelligence, should have a super full plate of stuff that might be happening to U.S. interests all over the world. and not creating diversionary foolishness like this, which is to essentially revive some old claims about the investigation into Russian attempts to influence the 2016 election, which, you had a 4-year special counsel look into whether there was this politicization. The House committee, which looked into this, never found it either. Neither did the special counsel. They did find sloppiness and shortcutting from the CIA and the FBI, but nothing that raises to the level of what Tulsi Gabbard is suggesting. And of course, you had, as President Obama, who made a rare response to all of this, pointed out that the Senate committee that looked into Russia's efforts to influence the 2016 election, Marco Rubio was on that committee and came to the conclusion that Russia did try to influence the election. So it's an incredible waste of time. It's a red herring, and it's all to divert attention from Epstein. We should also include that the files related to Martin Luther King Jr. were also released, just as a kind of very weird sign of everything that's being put out into the law.
We're going to get all the Kennedy assassination stuff's going to be out soon. All the Area 51 stuff, it's all going to be out. Everything you ever want to know, we're going to learn.
Bigfoot. Anything interesting from the MLK files?
Well, and while we're just rummaging through the cupboard to try to find things to release out into the world that we've had mysterious questions about, I don't know what happened to my stamp collection from when I was a little kid, and I'm thinking perhaps we could put the investigators on that.
Meanwhile, wait, I got to say one more thing about information, which is that the Trump administration asked the district court in the Epstein case from years ago to release the grand jury testimony, which was like the least likely thing for the court to be able to release. There are lots of rules about why grand jury testimony is secret, and you can't just go back and be like, hey, now we think it's in the public interest to release it. It's almost like they were asking for the thing they knew they wouldn't get.
John, better men than you have lost their marbles trying to predict the outcome of any particular Trump action and like whether this will have the effect. I find the whirling around about Obama to be so obviously bogus and so pathetic. And Obama's a pretty popular figure. As to this could actually be the rare example of Trump's chaos, energy, and skill with chaff not working. But am I being optimistic when I say that?
I don't know. I mean, as you quite rightly point out, I think it's a mug's game to try to suggest this is going to hurt or help. You can make the case, but I think there's no, even though this is, I think, different, as I mentioned before, the energy coming from within the Republican base in the way scandals happened before, who knows? I do think it's, and this connects to why it's weird to go after the Journal. By going after the Journal, first of all, and Emily, you can weigh in on this. I mean, if you really got to a lawsuit, discovery presumably would not work in the president's favor. It's also true with Ghislaine Maxwell. When Ghislaine Maxwell, she goes before a House committee, I mean, presumably some Democrat will say, you put together this book of birthday cards for Epstein. Was Donald Trump in there? I mean, now she's in the clink for 20 years, so maybe lying is maybe something she would do.
She might well want a pardon. She could get a pardon too.
Well, the idea that she's going to talk, she is appealing her criminal conviction. So unless she gets immunity, the idea that she's going to talk, immunity or pardons, means very unlikely.
In 2020, when Jonathan Swan of Axios interviewed Trump and asked about Ghislaine Maxwell, who had just then been arrested for what she was ultimately convicted for, Trump, who, will savage anyone at the drop of a hat, does it so much there are Wikipedia pages devoted to his insults and harsh judgments, said, I wish her well, which is what's his line with her, which, suggested, and it's one of the funny things with this Epstein thing, the president embraces the norms he usually breaks. So instead of insulting her for being basically a predator and helping Epstein prey on young women, he said, I wish her well. When it comes to the Epstein matter, the same president who talks about low flush toilets and sharks and Arnold Palmer's anatomy says, you're still talking about that? And then, of course, the most important one is that the wall between the White House and DOJ, which he has lowered and perhaps even erased, suddenly when it comes to this, he in the White House says, this is up to Bondi, really. They got to work this out. Like the norms are back in place, which of course is not a norm. But on this question of does this chaff end up hurting? I mean, I don't know why it's in his interest to revive the 2016 matter, because while it certainly gets the base to focus on, or it's an attempt to get the base to focus on something they're willing to, or have in the past shown a willingness to pay attention to. It does remind everybody else of all the things that, his campaign manager, his son, and others did to court Russian efforts to win the 2016 election. So it doesn't feel like a clean hit.
Let's finish up on this actual lawsuit. Emily, we know, or we strongly suspect, that some justices of the Supreme Court want to get rid of the actual malice standard in libel cases. From New York Times versus Sullivan, the case that said that if you're writing about public figures, it's not simple enough for something to be wrong. It also there has to have been real, what they call actual malice, but I think of it as like incredible negligence and unprofessionalness in the act of preparing.
That you knew something wasn't true, when
you didn't do anything to verify it. Yeah. And so I think Alito and maybe Gorsuch, or maybe Thomas, two of those three, have said they're skeptical about it. Is this the case that's likely to break libel law? I would not think so.
I don't think so either. I mean, I think you're right about the discovery. I think the question here is whether Rupert Murdoch is going to pay Trump off or not. So far, he seems disinclined. And the fact that the Journal also broke the story yesterday about how Bondi had told Trump earlier this spring that his name was in the Epstein files is a good sign that the Journal is just doing its job. It would be very, yes. I mean, look, two voices on the Supreme Court for revisiting this really important high standard for libel, which comes from New York Times versus Sullivan in the 1960s. 2 is not 5 to start with. There are also other things they could look at, right? They could look at the definition of a public figure. I think that's something that, it's become very broad, and maybe people who are not really famous or became public figures because of the coverage should have more libel protection. That's like reasonable people can disagree about that. The idea that right now, when the president is throwing around libel suits and other really rich people are doing the same, the Supreme Court would make it easier for publications to be held liable seems prudentially like a terrible idea. And the idea of using a case that President Trump brought as the vehicle for that, I gotta say, I just don't think the Supreme Court's majority is going to do that.
Can I just stumble around for just a brief second in one of the things that just completely I just don't understand, which is, if you were of a conspiratorial mindset, and obviously the people who want, some group of people who care about these Epstein files are highly conspiratorial, and you were looking for a figure, the elephant in the room, which is the big, powerful figure who would have some interest in keeping this material hidden. The guy who's in, the flight logs and the many pictures with Jeffrey Epstein, who wrote this weird birthday card and then says, I don't draw, and then 50 examples of him drawing come to light. And so there's, this sort of obvious way in which that was just easily disprovable. You're looking for an elephant in the room, and there is a giant elephant in the room. I'm not saying that there is any evidence, as Emily quite rightly pointed out earlier. Just because you're in some files means absolutely nothing and tells us nothing new, because what we already knew is that Donald Trump had a kind of different moral system about women and hung out with this guy. And we already knew all of that. And that doesn't seem to be a part of the energy of getting these Epstein files. But if you were of a conspiratorial mindset, it seems to me you would go, hey, there's an elephant. But even though there's all this pressure to release the Epstein files, it seems like there's not that much effort to say, hey, what about this guy? And that to me is quite surprising. Again, if you put on the conspiratorial mindset, which is normally the tiniest little bit of evidence becomes proof of, a grand conspiracy. Here you have what it would seem would be the kinds of things that might make a conspiratorial person actually blame the president, but he doesn't actually seem to be the target of this energy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes the conspiracy theorists you're talking about, it's like kind of makes your brain melt, right? Because Trump is supposed to be the savior. So the possibility, which seems quite real, that upon learning that his name was in these files, he was the one who told Pam Bondi not to release them. Like, that seems plausible, right? I mean, especially because he's a president who thinks that he directs and controls the Justice Department. That does, again, question to ask. I do think it is interesting and telling that particular fact about Bondi telling Trump leaked, right? Because that came from inside the White House or inside the Justice Department. And it's clear that there are people from inside the administration who are caught up in all of this or interested in this in a way that is not actually in the president's interests.
There's also the compounding that or supporting your theories, both of you, is the fact that Trump keeps saying, "Oh, what's in these files? It was Biden and Obama doctored the files," and presumably you're saying somebody doctored the files because there's something in there which makes you not look so great.
Obviously, the logical gap in that is they doctored the files and then they suppress them. So this makes no sense either.
Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Listen to Washington Wise, an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab, to hear the stories making news in Washington right now. Host Mike Townsend, Charles Schwab's managing director for legislative and regulatory affairs, takes a nonpartisan look at the stories that matter most to investors, including policy initiatives for retirement savings, taxes and trade, inflation concerns, the Federal Reserve, and how regulatory developments can affect companies, sectors, and even the entire market. Mike and his guests offer their perspective on how policy changes could affect what you do with your portfolio. Download the latest episode and follow at schwab.com/WashingtonWise or wherever you listen. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Mint Mobile. You know what doesn't belong in epic summer plans? Getting burned by your old wireless bill. That's why you should switch to Mint Mobile. Even Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile. And Charlie says more people should be trying it out. He found it incredibly easy to switch providers. The SIM card was shipped to his home. They let him use his existing phone, and he didn't even have to change his number. So say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. All Mint Mobile plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. This year, skip breaking a sweat and breaking the bank. Get this new customer offer and your 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month at mintmobile.com/gabfest. That's mintmobile.com/gabfest. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 per month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Jerry. Most of us aren't experts in deductibles or liability coverage, and trying to become one just to pick a policy is exhausting. Fortunately, there's a better way. Introducing Jerry. Jerry simplifies things by handling the entire insurance shopping process in one place. Just answer a few simple questions, and Jerry quickly compares quotes from over 50 top-rated insurers. You'll receive personalized options you can trust with 24/7 support. Jerry even cancels your old policy for you, which means switching is easy. Stop needlessly overpaying for car insurance. Drivers who save with Jerry save on average $110 a month. That's more than $1,300 a year. So before you renew your policy, do yourself a favor. Download the Jerry app or head to jerry.ai/gabfest. In just a few minutes, you can compare quotes and coverages side by side from up to 50 top insurers. Jerry, car insurance made simple and finally on your side. Based on drivers who switched and saved with Jerry over the past 12 months, over 20% of drivers who switched with Jerry found a monthly premium of $87 or less. Not all drivers find savings. An article caught our eye this week. This is the Presidency John Roberts has built by Peter Shane in The Atlantic. So, Emily, how does Peter Shane connect Roberts to the increasingly authoritarian world we're living in?
Well, Peter Shane, who's a law professor at NYU, is putting John Roberts at the center and really blaming him for this extremely aggressive theory of executive power that President Trump and his legal folks have embraced and promoted. And so this is called the unitary executive theory. And Shane's theory of the case is that because he's the Chief Justice and has written a number of important opinions in this domain and assigned the rest of them, that all of this you can pin on Roberts. I think that's kind of a exaggeration, sort of like for the sake of making the argument hold together. But it is certainly true that the Supreme Court has been buying into and furthering this agenda of more power for the president and the presidency and less for Congress. And then we had yet one more example of this on Wednesday when the court issued yet another emergency orders, right? These are these grants of relief to the Trump administration that come without full argument or briefing or any real explanation in the opinion. This one is about a Consumer Product Safety Commission and whether Trump could fire the 3 Democratic members of the board that ran it. The court said, yes, he can. The Trump administration, in its brief lifetime, has asked 21 times for emergency relief from the Supreme Court. That's like far outstrips the pace of previous presidencies. For example, Obama and George W. Bush, between them over 16 years, only asked for 8 total. Now we have 21 just in the past, 6 months. And the court has granted the last 18 of them. So that's a really high batting average for the Trump administration. And many of those decisions, again, without real explanation or full briefing and argument, have been about expanding executive power. And so Shane is connecting the dots here. He's also, of course, going back to the decision last year from the Supreme Court granting immunity from criminal prosecution for most of the official acts the president can take. That has been something the Trump administration has been waving around in a lot of these cases and saying has lots of broad applications. And so that's what we're talking about here. It's an accusation that the Supreme Court is kind of aiding and abetting a president who is arrogating tremendous power to himself.
John, you have written a book on the presidency. So what is the idea of the unitary executive? How is it in tension with, in conflict with the traditional idea of the presidency? And how does it emerge?
So it emerges, it's interesting. So I don't think you can read the founders in their debates and not get this overwhelming feeling about how nervous they were about 2 things, which is too much power to the executive and too much power to the people. Like they were nervous about both. But this theory, and Emily, you can edit me as I go along here, the theory is essentially the president should have domain over his agencies and his executive branch. And it is at odds with the idea that it was a system designed where particularly the agencies in the executive branch were to be created and maintained essentially by Congress as a part of the separation of powers, and that these duties were to be set for the duties of the executive branch were to be set forth by statute by Congress, which is the more powerful branch in the framers' conception, and that they act not on behalf of the president, but they act on behalf of the statutes. Roberts believes differently, that basically, and I thought this was a useful part of the article, that basically the point of the unitary executive, among other things, is both a political response to the liberal successes in the 60s and 70s, which is essentially Congress and the judiciary have run amok. And so we need a theory, or we would like to have motivated reasoning to back a theory that has a very strong, powerful president. But I think there's also an idea that the regulatory state, that the administrative state created by statute, is answerable to no one, leaving aside the fact that they're presumably answerable to Congress, and that the president, to be effective in executing the laws, needs to have the flexibility to manage all the people in the executive branch. And so I think that's essentially where it comes through. I mean, there's a constitutional, I guess a quasi-constitutional argument for taking back some power to the presidency. He's got all these unelected bureaucrats who are stuffed in there by Congress on statutes that are old, and it just weighs down the presidency. So you need to limber him up a little bit. But then there's the very clear political benefit to the unitary executive, which is that it's a way to cut through quickly what liberals have been able to succeed through statute and law. I think the historical part and the idea, though, that somehow the framers saw the president as an office that was responsive to the people doesn't account with my recollection of reading about the role the Electoral College was to play, which was in fact to be a bulwark against the people, that the electors, as Hamilton argued them, would be these wise people who would make sure that a demagogue wasn't picked because they would be distant and distinct from the democracy. And so Roberts' conception of the president as answerable to the people in the founder's conception, and therefore a useful kind of weather vane to the public mood in the best spirit of democracy, was like not my reading of the way it was created.
You're nodding, Emily.
Yeah, I thought that was an important point. I mean, the other thing, just to pick up on what you're saying about federal agencies, John, and their level of independence from the president, Shane reminds us, and I think this is important, that federal agencies have duties, and those are mostly set forth in laws that Congress enacts, right? So yes, the president is supervising them, but as Shane puts it, he's not commanding them because it's his job to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And I feel like that has somehow gotten lost in the Supreme Court's conception of executive power, and it's really important. I mean, to take a step back, one way I think about this is like, okay, in a parliamentary system, to be sweeping for a moment, a party comes into power and they get to like do everything. They get to enact their agenda, right? They control how the government works. They appoint the ministers. The government turns over. We have not had that kind of system. We have had a lot of internal consistency from federal agencies. They continue to interpret and apply regulations from president to president. And until now, the president has not like fired vast swaths of them and just chucked all the people who run the agencies, not for cause, not because they didn't do their jobs, but just because he doesn't like their politics. And so you've had a kind of stasis in these agencies that has been pro-regulatory because they are enforcing laws that call for regulations over time. Republicans and conservatives don't like that, right? They have been very frustrated at the kind of frozenness of Washington and continuing to interpret and apply a lot of regulations. And so now they want to throw the whole thing out. And the way to do that is to basically have the president, while he or she is in power, have much more authority and be kind of like kingly in going around and firing everyone. And the Supreme Court's buying into that.
I would actually dispute your characterization of parliamentary government. I mean, one of the interesting things about parliamentary democracies is actually they have incredibly entrenched bureaucracies. Because when you have a parliamentary system, the government doesn't change over on a regular schedule. The government can flip like in a month. If you're in Italy, it's like there's a new government. There's every 6 months. And so as a result, you end up with bureaucracies that are pretty static, and they are very they do the duty. They respond to the leadership, but they themselves are pretty entrenched. And I think there's an American skepticism of that. And there's a desire. This is the Jacksonian tradition, right? The Jacksonian tradition is like, when we take control of the government, we take control of the whole freaking government. And that's an American idea, but I don't think it's the idea in most parliamentary systems. In most parliamentary systems, I think it's like we've overlaid a kind of ruling party over it, and they get to make a lot of choices. But the people who are executing everything day to day remain this sclerotic bureaucracy.
It's kind of expert class. And maybe it depends on which function of government we're talking about.
Expert class. And I think there's an American response to that expert. I think what we're seeing actually is the American skepticism about the expert class. I've been reading, I talked about, I read Clan of the Cave Bear, and I've been reading other books about sort of early history, and I've read some Rome books recently. And what I hate about this whole idea is this idea of the chieftainness of it, the idea of personal loyalty. And one of the great, very successful aspects of modernity is the rational bureaucracy and the science and rules-based and evidence-based rules making that tends to make things fairer and more efficient. And the idea that we toss that out for some notion that we have embodied the government, we have embodied the nation in a person, it seems incredibly antithetical to the entire course of human history or the progress of modernity, and is also antithetical to American traditions, and also will be super destructive to the country as a whole in the long run. So it seems like really Bronze Age to me.
Yes, and we would also agree that obviously that the professional class can become an entrenched bureaucracy, and so that's why the push and pull is so vital. That's why the fighting ambition between, if Congress cared about these agencies that it was creating through statute and was not handing over so much power to the presidency, even previous presidents who didn't have the view of power that Donald Trump has, if that were in good working order, you would get the as close to equipoise as you could get. But in this vision of the world, the at-will firing of your bureaucracy makes it very hard for them to cultivate the kind of expertise you're talking about. And we're kind of seeing some of that now as you see experts getting tossed out as FEMA is being thought of, maybe we shouldn't get rid of FEMA now that we've just had this massive flood to remind us, which we shouldn't really have needed reminding about, that despite all of FEMA's problems, it's still a useful thing to have around.
Saying FEMA just as a trigger, because I was reading a story today about how Maryland is not getting FEMA funds for floods that happened in Western Maryland. I'm all for FEMA. I think FEMA is great. But the problem with having a personalized unitary executive is that then a personalized unitary executive also picks favorites and says California and Maryland, Democratic states, maybe you get your federal relief, maybe you don't. Whereas Texas, they are pouring resources into Texas, which is fine. Texas suffered a terrible loss. It's a huge issue. But the solution is not, yes, maintain FEMA, but allow the president to pick and choose favorites within who gets emergency benefits. That seems to me a pretty awful outcome as well.
And just to bring this back to the Supreme Court, there's also this question of timing, right? You have 6-3 splits in these cases, Republican conservative appointees versus Democratic liberal ones. You have the Republican majority ruling over and over to enhance the powers of a Republican president and change the whole structure of independence for these agencies that Congress set up mostly 95 years ago during the New Deal that has been with us ever since. And is this really a good idea? It's not the structure of government we've had for this century. And it's as if the court is pretending to shut its eyes to the reality of the Trump administration, or really is shutting its eyes. And neither of those seem like particularly fortuitous stances for the court to be in right now.
Can I bring this home by talking about what people who are worried about the unitary executive can hope for, what they can do? I mean, it seems that we have a president who is intent on exerting vast power, and a Republican Party that, as long as there's a Republican president, is certainly into that idea. You have a Supreme Court, which has a conservative majority that doesn't look to be changing anytime soon, which is in tune with the idea of the unitary executive. So I think it is unrealistic to think that there's a short-term, easy solution to this arrogation, to use. I'm never even sure what that word means, but legal people use it. I'm going to arrogate the word arrogate from Emily.
Good.
This arrogation of power. So what is it that can happen? And I was thinking about, if I were an activist who were trying, or just a citizen who's trying to minimize the effect of the unitary executive, I think the things that I would look to are, what are the ways in which state and local governments represent this alternative power source in the American system. One of the other weirdnesses of the American system is federalism, which is that there isn't one government. There are layer after layer of government. So if you feel that the massive amount of government overreach at the federal level is hard to resist, you're right. But their courts may still be willing to find federalist principles, may be willing to allow state governments and in some cases local governments to exercise a kind of domain expertise for themselves and create separate power centers at the state level, which are somewhat resistant to the unitary executive. That's number one. There's still police powers at the state level. You can't, the people who are being arrested for minor drug charges or minor robbery charges in New York State are not being arrested by the FBI. That's one thing. The other is, we are a nation, and this is probably the greatest strength we have. And I'm telling you, Gabfest listeners, just remember this, filled with non-government organizations, trade and professional associations. And they are really what distinguishes America from a lot of other nations in the world, is the number of different kinds of associations we have. And if I were somebody who worked in medicine or worked in energy, what I would be trying to do is to use the power of these completely non-governmental entities to create standards around behavior. So yes, you have a unitary executive who is willy-nilly changing how vaccines are being done. But if you're the AMA, if you're the American Medical Association, there's a huge coercive power that you have to get your organization to state very strongly, here's how the vaccine schedule could work, and to get doctors to sort of make that their cause and to talk about it. And that is a totally separate action from whatever's happening at the executive, who is like, changing what vaccines are available and how, yes. But you can still have this rhetorical force of these non-governmental organizations that resist it. So those are two things that I would look to if I were trying to look for hope in this moment as someone who's skeptical of the entire executive. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Bombas. Summer's here and we're all chasing something, a break, a goal, a vibe. Do not let bad socks and blisters ruin it. I am a Bombas socks evangelist. I'm a Bombas socks enthusiast. Every day I'm in my Bombas socks now. They're so comfortable. They have this incredible quality of being both cool and breathable, but also holding tight, gripping in all the right ways. And it makes all the kind of exercise I do in Bombas a pure joy. And Bombas doesn't stop at socks. Check out the fresh white tees, waterproof slides for the beach, and buttery soft sweat-wicking underwear for head-to-toe comfort. Best of all, Bombas items don't just feel good, they do good, because one purchased equals one donated to someone who needs it. Head over to bombas.com/political and use code political for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/political, code political at checkout. bombas.com/political and use code political. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Upwork. If you're running a business right now, you already know it's hard because of tight budgets, hiring freezes, and economic uncertainty. But the good news is that Upwork is helping small businesses do more with less. Upwork is the hiring platform designed for the modern playbook, where you can find, hire, and pay expert freelancers who can deliver results from day one. It's perfect for businesses on tight budgets, fast timelines, and with zero room for error. If you've never tried Upwork, now is the perfect time because they're giving Political Gabfest listeners a $200 credit after spending $1,000 in the first 30 days. That's $200 you can put toward your next freelancer, whether it's design help, AI automation, admin support, marketing, or whatever your business needs. Visit upwork.com/save right now for this great offer. That's upwork.com/save to get a $200 credit to put towards your next freelancer to help grow your business. That's upwork.com/SAVE. Upwork.com/save. Don't wait. This offer is only valid June 24th through August 5th, 2025. The Republican political establishment of Texas is just amazing. It is like an amazing enterprise. Texas Republicans, I love Texas so much. I'm not a Texas Republican. I'm not a Republican. But you just got to admire the kind of brashness and boldness and complete lack of conscience, maybe they have consciousness in Texas. It is just, it's always crazy in Texas politics, and it's just even crazier this week. So Governor Greg Abbott has convened a special session of the Texas legislature, which is totally dominated by Republicans, ostensibly to grapple with legislation relating to floods, but actually basically to push through a mid-decade redistricting. And this is all against the backdrop of what I hope we'll talk about, this crazy new Senate campaign that's emerging. So I was just surprised to learn, Emily, that mid-decade redistricting is legal.
Yeah, I had the same question. And then someone reminded me about Tom DeLay doing this years ago.
I was just going to say, and Rick Perry. They cooked all this up. It's just like, this goes back to your point, David, that this has deep roots. Carry on, Emily.
No, that's it. Apparently you can do it. Continue. And Texas is not the only state thinking about this, right? Ohio and Missouri, the Republicans are also imagining this. And then, of course, the question is, can Democrats respond in the states they control?
So what is it that they are proposing to do in Texas, John? What is it that seems to be happening? Because Texas already has a fairly Republican House delegation.
Yeah, there are 38 House seats in Texas. 25 of them are Republicans.
And the vote is like 55-40. It's like 55-45 about Republicans, Democrats in the state. So
in terms of the electorate.
Yeah.
Right. So you're already having disproportional representation in Congress.
Yes. So President Trump is, and this is quite canny, in the larger context, the party in power loses since World War II anywhere between, let's say, around 27 seats. So the president, based on history, even though there are probably about 18 kind of battleground House districts at the moment, based on history, the party in power is likely to lose seats. And given the tiny House majority, all the Republicans have to do is lose 3 seats, and the Democrats are in control. So how do you find more seats? Especially, and we can talk about how difficult the political environment is for the president and his party right now, based on the latest CBS poll. But just based on history, how do you find more seats? So the president is pressuring Texas to find 5 more seats by redistricting, redrawing the map in Texas to basically distribute Democratic votes, to thin out Democratic votes and try to build districts that will have sufficient Republican support and weakened Democratic support to basically create 5 new districts for where Republicans would do better. The obvious risk is that you could do that and end up it could backfire and end up in 2 possible ways. You end up creating districts where you don't draw them right, or you depend on, the Hispanic vote being better for Donald Trump's party than it is. He's already lost a good deal of support from Hispanic voters, at least based on the polling already. So basically you draw them one way and then it doesn't work out, and you not only don't win 5 seats, you maybe put some of your seats up, put them in danger. And the other is just the kind of the rubber ball bouncing theory, which is, Democrats in New York tried to monkey, different situation considerably, but tried to monkey with the drawing of lines in New York, where there was an independent commission. Anyway, there was a special master who ended up getting the power to draw the map and ended up drawing a map in which Democrats were disadvantaged. So this is what's it called? Dummy mandering, that basically the idea that you try to draw the map in a way that helps your party and it ends up hurting it. So that's what makes, and I would add one other thing that I don't know exactly how this works, but obviously the special session that the governor called is to address the relief needs in the wake of the horrible Texas floods. And you could imagine a situation in which that's the business they should be paying attention to. And if this becomes something, if a power grab for the party seems to be more on their minds than delivering relief, that could be, potentially not great for the party.
I thought in New York what happened was that a court actually overturned the Democratic map as being too gerrymandered under New York law. So To me, what that stands for is the problem that, so I'm a big fan of nonpartisan redistricting commissions in states where you take this away from the legislature and make it less partisan and political. The problem is that there's been unilateral disarmament, right? Where it's California and New York for the most part. I think Arizona has one, but the states that have these nonpartisan commissions tend to be states where then Democrats end up with fewer seats, whereas the Republican states didn't adopt them. And the New York law that the New York court applied is New York state law. So the prospect that a Texas court is going to rule the same way seems like super dim. Anyway, just to give that legal context. And I guess I also just want to remind us that the Supreme Court several years ago decided that there was no legal basis in federal law for challenging redistricting on the basis of partisan gerrymandering, right? So the court said, it doesn't matter how disproportional your map is. There is no federal claim on that basis alone for getting rid of the map. We still have a little bit of racial gerrymandering law left, and it's possible that the way the Republicans try to redraw this will essentially dilute the power of Latino voters in a way that a court theoretically could find is not allowed by the Voting Rights Act. But look at the composition of the Supreme Court. We'll see whether that happens. And so, what's really left is just brute politics, as you were saying, John, that there's always a tension in how you draw these districts. If you spread your own partisan voters out too thinly, then you have to have more of a sweep, right? You have to make sure you can still win all those seats because you have not less comfortable margins. Versus this, right? It's called packing the voters versus cracking them. And then another thing to bring up here is, and actually Arizona Senator Ruben Gallego was tweeting about this, there has been some incentive to pack Democratic voters into safe districts as well, right? From the point of view of the members of Congress, everybody is happier if they don't have to run real races. It's part of why Congress has become so polarized. And so sometimes, and I don't know that much about the map in Texas, you have these very safe districts for Democrats that allow for a certain number of Black or Hispanic legislators to get elected very comfortably. Whereas it would be more democratic and better for the political power of that minority group if they were spread out more too. But the Democrats have to start making that argument, I think, more clearly than they have in the past in order to help address some of these politics.
Just going to the idea that it could backfire and that they could spread Republican votes too thin. The reading I was doing on this, which admittedly was sparse but not non-existent, suggests that that's wishful thinking on the part of Democrats. That the science of district drawing has gotten really, really good. Like they have very, street level, house level data about who people are, and they have strong theories and a lot of record evidence. And the kind of failed gerrymanders are a thing of the past. That basically in the last 15, 20 years, they figured out how, if you want to create a district that is going to be pretty safe, here's how to do it. Not to say that wave elections change things, but that broadly speaking, they can draw safer districts. They can draw a map in Texas that will create effectively 37 safe seats, and it will be on the spot. It will be right. And you can wish that wouldn't be so, or you can say, oh, they're going to mess it up, or you can hope that there will be a voter backlash against it. But probably you're just going to lose a bunch of seats.
So point well taken. And the implications of that, are that, if Texas, say Ohio and Missouri, if everybody does this, then you make it much harder for the Democrats to take back the House in 2026. Like that's what's on the line. And, you could then say, okay, well, what about California? The Democrats could go back and get rid of their nonpartisan redistricting commission and put more of those seats in play for Democrats, except that, as I understand it, requires the legislature to pass a law and for the voters to vote on it, because I think they did a constitutional amendment in California as a ballot initiative. And so all of that would take time. It would not be done by 2026. So that's what I mean by unilateral disarmament.
And Dave Wasserman of the Cook Political Report, who slices this bologna as thin as anyone, essentially agrees with your view, David, that the Texas Republicans have a clear opportunity to pick up 3 to 5 seats. So, as you were saying, to do the math, 3 to 5 seats plus the 3 Democrats would need to take control, plus maybe 2 in Ohio through a version of the same thing. That means Democrats would have to get, let's go at the far end, that's 8, 10 seats. But again, the average is 27. So it would make it harder, but historically, the history would still be on the Democratic side. The generic polling favors Democrats at the moment. When you ask people, would you rather have a Democrat or a Republican? And the polling for the president and his party, both on specific issues, the CBS poll showed, that basically people care about the increase in prices, and they don't think the president is doing enough. Close to 70% don't think he's doing enough about prices. They also think that what he is doing is actually causing prices to increase. They also think on the question of immigration that he's gone too far. He doesn't seem to be changing either of those two things. And so we'll test 2 things, at least in the interim elections, which is, one, do those averages post-World War II hold? And secondly, does the old maxim that it's the economy stupid really matter? Does it matter anymore? Because you couldn't test it more than what President Trump is doing. I mean, voters say, he hasn't improved their lives. He's not focused on what they think he should be focused on. And the thing he is focused on is making the thing they care about a lot worse.
On the other hand, they don't like Democrats. On the other hand, Democrats are very unpopular. So there's also that.
Well, yeah. Although then the question becomes, do people end up voting about, in an off-year election, it ends up being the base, and do they end up voting antipathy rather than support?
Yes. The 2 final things. One, bologna slicing. I don't really eat bologna, but I do eat a lot of other meats. Thinly sliced is so much better.
Salami.
Like the thinner.
Oh, really? Bologna?
The thinner you can slice. Well, I don't eat bologna, but the thinner you can slice salami, the thinner you can slice prosciutto, the thinner you can slice any of it, the better it is. It's just like there's somehow the amount of surface area exposed is excellent. So I think keep slicing the bologna thinner.
Also, I think of prosciutto really as being absolutely sliced thinly. I think bologna really Do people really spend a lot of time slicing bologna and thinner and
I don't
thinner?
think people slice their own bologna at all.
No, they probably don't anymore. So
I think you can't get
metaphor.
Can't get a whole
That
bologna.
metaphor is...
Let's just spend 1 minute on the coming epic Senate showdown between John Cornyn, the senior Republican senator of Texas, who is extremely conservative, but conservative in a very traditional way. Like, he's a gentleman. He's a well-liked senator, and he's a person who just he behaves in a kind of gentlemanly way. He's not particularly Trumpy. Versus Texas State Attorney General Ken Paxton, who is incredibly pugnacious character. He makes Ted Cruz look like a Muppet. Incredibly effective as Attorney General, wildly conservative, and hugely controversial. And he was nearly impeached by the very Republican state Senate just a couple of years ago. Now his wife, Angela, who is also a state senator, has filed for divorce as Ken Paxton's campaign has gotten underway, with strong insinuations that she's accusing him of adultery, although the divorce records are sealed, which I think is fine. I think that seems reasonable. Yet, John, why is Paxton running ahead of this very effective, long-serving senior senator John Cornyn so far? I mean, the primary isn't for a while.
He's closer to the base of the modern Republican Party, and he's close to the leader of the modern Republican Party, which is really the Donald Trump Party. And what interests me about him is that Ken Paxton seems to be the first, no, not the first, but the biggest test of the transferability of the Donald Trump's successful relationship with MAGA, both on a kind of operational political level, but also on a moral level. Trump was able to get the party to drop its long-standing concerns about the personal morality of its candidates. And not even that, to start to see the picadillos as badges of honor. It's not almost like, there have been, situations in which the brave standing up against being revealed to have been recorded on tape talking about assaulting women gains you a kind of cred, and certainly has with President Trump. So does that transfer? It didn't with Herschel Walker when he was accused of a variety of things. That slowed him down. But Paxton is a possible example of how it might be possible for a non-Donald Trump politician to access the same energy Trump has been able to.
I had not even seen it that way, John. Thanks for framing it that way. That's depressing. Let us go to cocktail chatter. When, Emily Bazelon, you're sitting a hot Connecticut evening, a lime Ricky. I don't know if that's a drink. I just made it up.
Like
a lime Ricky in your glass. Mr. Bazelon hanging on your every word. What are you saying?
I enjoyed this week a response that Ann Patchett did on Instagram to a column by David Brooks in the New York Times. So Brooks was complaining about literary fiction in this moment, saying that it's not capturing the big themes of American life, that it's become a kind of subculture. And he was hearkening back to the days of, Norman Mailer and Saul Bellow and Updike, these titanic figures that he says don't exist any longer. And Patchett just came back at him with this very feisty defense of literary fiction and lots of good book recommendations. So anyway, we'll post the link, and I really enjoyed that. And then I also wanted to recommend a new book that I'm excited to dig into called The Gods of New York. It's by my New York Times Magazine colleague, Jonathan Mahler. And it's about New York City. Jonathan talks about this as the birth of the modern city between 1986 and 1990. It's this really important, interesting moment, right? When Ed Koch is mayor, and there are all these figures out there, including Bernard Goetz, getting lots of attention. And Jonathan is such a strong and vigorous writer. And I've talked with him about this book and this period, and he's totally fascinated by it. So I'm really excited to dig into this book. It's about to come out, The Gods of New York by Jonathan Mahler. And Patchett is recommending a lot of fiction and some great novels for the summer. This is also a kind of propulsive nonfiction book to add to your list.
John Dickerson.
As if Iran doesn't have enough problems on Wednesday, they had to declare a holiday in Tehran and the surrounding areas because basically they're out of water. 14 million people.
Oh my God.
And it has been a long-standing problem. And there's just this amazing pictures of what the reservoirs, which are down to like 7%.
Oh my God.
And this is exacerbated by the fact that I think on Wednesday it was 120 degrees. Blackouts, just the whole kit and caboodle. And then I read that in Athens, they're reviving a 2,000-year-old Roman aqueduct because the prolonged droughts in Athens. So this aqueduct that was built by the Roman Empire is now being brought back into service in order to deal with this ongoing drought. And it just reminded me, not that we read a lot about the water shortages that are going to be created by the need to cool the servers that are running all of this artificial intelligence, but the way in which water, which maybe some people take for granted, other people think about all the time, can and does cause, major changes in geopolitics. And those were just two this week, but it's not. This problem is not going away with climate change.
I think it's the Times has been doing. I can't tell if it's a series or I just happen to have noticed it, but articles about what it is like to live in places with extreme heat, and they are just
devastating.
I mean, they are so hard to read, and they are, they're the future for hundreds of millions of people, and maybe for all of us in some way. My chatter. So I'm doing 3 quick chatters. Number 1, delighted to read the Private Eye novel by Robert Galbraith, who is what is J.K. Rowling's nom de plume, The Cuckoo's Calling. I know this book came out several years ago. I'm sure many of you have read it, but I am just catching up to it. It's so delightful. It's a Private Eye novel. It's just so good. She's such a good writer. She's not like a great writer, but she's just a really good writer. Everything fits together. It's all clean. Every sentence is strong and makes sense. And it's just, she's excellent. She's excellent. And the book is great. Then secondly, if you're in Salt Lake City next week on August 1st, CityCast Salt Lake is holding 801 Day, a celebration. So the area code for Salt Lake City is 801, and 801 is August 1st. So on August 1st, we've invented a new city holiday for Salt Lake, and we're holding a festival in downtown Salt Lake to celebrate the city of Salt Lake. I'm going to be there, but please come out for 801 Day if you're in Salt Lake City. And then finally, this is my real chatter. So my mother has just had surgery, and so I've been spending time taking care of her. And it means I've spent time at her house. She lives near me in DC. And yesterday, I got the chance to do something which I recommend to anybody who has a mother who's a wonderful cook, but, it's, just maybe not paying attention to everything. I cleaned her fridge. It was the most incredible experience of my entire life. There were 5 jars of capers. There were cheeses of unknown provenance. There were, jams that she had made in the 90s. Tofu stored in like 4 different regions of the fridge. It was so fun to clear it out. It was just so fun. So if you ever get the chance to do that with a parent's fridge, really recommend it. It was the most fun I've had all week.
Relatedly, I have this tiny jar of horseradish from my grandmother who died really a lot of years ago, and I can't.
Oh, your grandma died a lot of years ago.
I mean, I'm not going to ever eat it, but I can't bear to throw it out because I still have it. Anyway, that's a dilemma.
We found that in a previous purge of the jam, we found jam that my grandmother had made in the 80s. So this is maybe a year or 2 ago. Jam that my grandmother had made in the 80s that was still in the house. And it was fine, actually. It had never been opened. It was sealed. It was vacuum sealed. It was, had been sterilized when it had been made. But it was like 38 years old.
Wow. Did you eat it?
I tried a little spoonful. It wasn't that good. It wasn't, either because my grandmother didn't make great jam or because it was 38 years old. But I wasn't going to get sick from it.
I don't have a relative storing old stuff in refrigerators story because my mother somehow, despite having been born in 1927, did not really cook, really maintained a kind of extraordinary inability to cook, really. Like Hamburger Helper was about as good as it got.
Your mom was born in 27?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So she was like 42 or something when you were born.
Precisely.
Wow.
Yeah. I know. And she died when she was 70, which now seems incredibly young, especially for her. Anyway, so all of my food and cooking stuff I get from my mother-in-law, who was a home, I think they called it home economics at the time, either major or expert. And so all things are in the just and tidy shape as they should be in her kitchen. But a friend of mine is from Great Britain, and I have occasionally stayed at her house. And I remember, I think this is true, we once found a jar of mayonnaise in the cupboard, which is to say not the fridge, that was like 5 years old and had clearly was still in use. And apparently, and everybody was still relatively healthy.
And no one was dead from being
no one was dead. But I just thought, wow, the bravery, the sense of London under the Blitz. Just the kind of give us the tools and we shall finish the job. And one of them is an ancient bottle of Hellmann's. Anyway, so there you go.
I just want to note, by the way, listeners, my mother is an amazing cook and a delightful woman to boot. Listeners, please keep your listener chatters coming to us by emailing to us at gabfest@slate.com, something that is delighting you. Maybe you've cleaned out a garage. Our listener chatter this week comes from a man with the most delightful accent, James Megan from Christchurch, New Zealand.
Hello, Gabfest. James Megan from Christchurch, New Zealand here. My chatter is from a recent story on the Radio New Zealand website regarding a lawsuit that has been issued against Trevor Mallard, the former Speaker of our House of Representatives. The case arises out of an extended anti-vaccination protest camp that formed outside Parliament at the end of the pandemic. The Speaker himself has ultimate power over Parliament's grounds, so to try to make the camp uncomfortable, Mallard turned on the lawn sprinklers and used the public address system to play loud Barry Manilow music and other tracks. These measures are now being challenged as a breach of the right not to be subject to torture or cruel treatment, amongst other claims. Since the protest ended, Mallard has moved on to become the ambassador to Ireland, but back home we await the very real possibility that at some stage a judge will have to make a definitive ruling on the question, is listening to Barry Manilow torture?
That's all for our episode this week. We also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about the Coldplay Kiss Cam scandal that memed the world last week. That, however, is only for Slate Plus members. Slate Plus members never hit the paywall on the Slate site. They get discounts to our live shows. I hope we do a live show one of these days. It's been a minute. They get bonus episodes of the Gabfest and other Slate podcasts. And again, if you are a member, thanks for that. If you're not a member, become a member. Come on, just do it. Support media. Media needs support. Subscribe to Slate Plus from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. Also, if you're in the mood for another Slate podcast, check out What Next episode on how dead is the Department of Education. What Next talks to Washington Post writer Laura Meckler about what America could lose if Trump succeeds in shutting down the education department, which I think he probably will.
Laura Meckler is great.
Yeah.
What will we lose? So that's on What Next. That's our show for today. Our researcher this week is Nora Moses. Thank you, Nora, for stepping in for vacationing Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We will talk to you next week.
Mamá, papá, mi cuerpo crece a un ritmo alarmante y la ropa que me compren ahora me quedará muy pequeña muy pronto. Pero su billetera no tiene que sufrir por la moda con los precios bajos de la vuelta a clases de Amazon. Amazon, gasta menos, sonríe más.
For those who want more out of every moment this summer, Mazda has more 2025 IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than any other brand as of May 2025. What more could you ask for? Discover how Mazda has more to move you today. Visit iihs.org to learn more.
Every Mazda SUV offers you an elevated driving experience and refined performance. Discover it at Mazda of New Rochelle.